many of you on a lot of different things. Our goal here today is, if you look at your slides, there's not a ton of them because we don't. This isn't one of those sessions. The idea of this entire thing is that, first of all, there have been numerous changes over the last year and a half in terms of the inventory, the spillover effects on the reporting that'll go with that, SUE scores, construction costs, the threshold amounts for project approval. There have been probably more changes in the last 18 months than since my time here in Texas higher education. So it's probably a good idea for us to get together to make sure that all of us are on the same sheet of music, that whatever concerns that are out there that you have, that we either know what they are or can allay those concerns from the start. Now, this is all being cameraed, so keep your profanities and throwing stuff to a minimum at me. I'd appreciate it, and I will attempt to do the same. Also, at the TCUF, which, by the way, was a great conference, and hope that organization continues to put on that fabulous event. A lot of folks came and said, is there going to be any kind of tutorial or anything? I'm new to this field. I haven't done inventory stuff before. Is there any way that I can get some training, some information, or something to help me along the way? This is also going to serve as that kind of event. But most of it's going to serve as a dialogue or discussion, however you want to put it, in that if you look at the structure, when we go over the agenda, you'll see it's 50 minutes with a 10-minute break. And that's intentional. Okay? It's not to prolong a day. Because my experience of having sat on the other side is that the really good discussions, the really meaty stuff, goes on during breaks. That's when people get together and go, hey, this doesn't make sense. And then when we come back from break, that's the first thing we're going to hit on, is bringing all those issues up. We want to know. Some of the stuff, to be honest with you, there may be little that we can do about it right now. But we've got a lot of stuff going on in the future, things we're going to look at, and we'll put those things on the agenda to look at them with your assistance in the working groups and advisory groups that we put forth. You've got a great group of folks. Let me introduce some of them. You've got Paul Turcotte over here. He works a lot with the finance stuff. We work with everybody. And we cross over different things, so you may talk to different people. Jennifer Gonzalez, who does a lot of the capital type stuff from projects, as a space model. So if you have any issues and complaints, it's her fault. No, I'm kidding, of course. Back in the back, you've got Deb Perez. She does the audits, and I guess they'll have a session on Thursday with the audit stuff. But there may be some questions that come out of here, and she'll be more than happy to field those. Now, and some of the changes that have taken place in the inventory will result in report structure changes in the 005, 11, and 14. And to field those questions and to address those kind of things, we've got Torsia back there in the back. There she is, looking up, and she will handle those. Okay, again, intended to be a dialogue. I'm not going to sit up here and preach a whole lot and give the meat and potatoes of the whole thing, and then we're going to go forward. Slide, please. Back one. Okay, again, you can read it there. What we want to do is a lot of times issues at an institution will, they kind of stew and they kind of fester and they sit there and people may sit there and say, this just isn't a big enough thing. I don't know who to call, and I don't want to seem like I'm, crying wolf or chicken little. I don't know. And then after a while, it becomes a huge issue. And then all of a sudden, the first time some little thing happens, we've got an explosion. We want to help to quell that. So getting the stuff out in the forum right now. And one of the main things, timely and accurate reporting. I've said this, you'll probably hear me say it a couple times. A lot of the models we do, whether it's the utilization, the SUE that we'll go over, or the space model, we can't start that until we get all the reports in. Okay? So if one institution is running late, then essentially we're stopped. So if you look at it in terms of timeline, we've got a statutory requirement to put them out on a given date. We request the information here. As we wait past there, the difference between those dates is your opportunity to review it and provide corrections, because we do the best we can, but we know we're human. We're going to make some mistakes, and we count on your feedback to tell us, hey, this doesn't look right, or something along those lines. Okay? So, in terms of that, if we wait on reports, the only thing that we are compressing is the time for review. And we don't want to do that. So we want to get those data up front and accurate. Now, when you go in and reopen a report, that essentially resets the clock, because we have to go back through and do all those. And it's not a whole lot of people here, and folks, you're looking at it. These are all the people that do all those different studies and reports things. So it's essential that we get those data accurately and in a timely fashion. Many of the changes that come forward that we have in terms of policies and policy changes, things that have come up in the legislature that I think will impact this, we'll touch on those also, because we want to understand where those things might lead. In fact, one of them, talking to Gary Barnard this morning, he was just getting ready to go do a presentation, and we informed what our proposed rule change is going to look like. We'll change that, and we'll touch on that. Again, as long as we can keep a dialogue, discussion going, we're going to be in better shape in the long run to identify the issues, because, folks, we do listen. Okay, slide, please. Very quickly, this is what we're going to look at. We're going to touch on the inventory changes. We'll go over space usage efficiency, look at construction costs and replacement value, then talk about the space model and some other upcoming reviews that we'll be having, that we'll be calling for folks to serve on advisory and working groups. And then we're going to have an open forum. That's specifically tailored for those folks that are kind of new or that want to get a refresher, because I know a lot of times institutions don't deal with this stuff every day. If you have a relatively small institution, you're not going to be out there doing the facilities inventory every day. If you have a large institution, you're going to be working on a facilities inventory about every day, or you're in big trouble. And there's some things that we owe you in terms of policy type stuff that we need to get your feedback on. Okay, next slide, please. Any questions before we go forward? And feel free to raise your hand, yell, scream, holler on any questions that pop up. Okay, slide. When I guess it was 2005, I really started hearing about, we need to do some changes to facilities inventory manual. And it talked on a lot of people, yeah, we need to change it. And there were some, paper sent forward to the coordinating board saying, here's some things we need to do. And they kind of just died out. Last summer, a group, and many of you that I see out here were part of that group, got together and said, okay, let's look at it. And in the end, took the National Center for Educational Statistics manual that was just rewritten 2 years ago, and looked at making the greatest amount of alignment possible between that manual and our manual without breaking anything. Now, that seems pretty easy, but it's not always as easy as it sounds. And I think that group did an excellent job. So that's part of it, because then as you're looking at your federal indirect cost recovery, there's some common terminology, and there's a lot less confusion when those things go forward. And even in terms of accreditation, you've got a more standardized national protocol for different things, either naming rooms or numbering rooms, and that makes it very easy. So one of the first changes you see is in terminology. This is big. Room type, and I don't have it down, folks, so if you're talking to me, I'll probably say room type, and I'll go, wait a minute, what do we call that? Room type is space use code. Now, I'm not real sure why the NCES changed this term. I'm sure there's a very good reason, but needless to say, they did change it. Hence, the group said, okay, fine, change it. And the usage code is now functional category code. The manual that you had before has been updated to reflect this. Reporting room area, not the dimensions. That's what we get. Institutionally, whatever data that you want to keep, if you want to keep the dimensional data on rooms because you find utility in that some way, that's great. And this is just the data that we get. This isn't telling you what data you can have or whatever, but we don't need dimension 1, dimension 2, alcove 1, alcove 2, alcove 3, 4, all those kind of things. just the room area, and they're updating. Yes, sir.
What about the report of the from the web? Is that going to show the issue?
The report that's being updated right now will show, you'll have a block, and the manual reflects that which characters are room area.
I mean, right now.
Oh, you mean the report when you go look at it? Yeah, that'll change. It'll just say room area. Yeah, it won't say dimensions because we won't have them. Yeah, it'll when the new report gets populated, then it'll have that area, and we'll remove that. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, expanded data fields. Building number to 6 characters, room number to 16 characters. As you're looking at this, remember, it isn't just the CBM 11 and 14 that's impacted. The CBM 5 will be changed also because that has building and room information on it. So that will definitely change. 16 characters on a room number. I've never used a 16-character room number, so there's plenty. Yes, sir. You object? Okay, noted. We have an objection from the rear, and noted. But I assume the zero fills hopefully won't be too laborious to deal with. But there are plenty. Additional information, floor. There's a protocol for the floor number that was built in there with diagrams. It's in the manual. Some believe that having a floor indicator was good. Found that to have utility. We thought that, sure, put it in there. It's one of the optional reporting characteristics out of the NCES manual, so it's there. Now, some of you may be using different standards based on your CAD and things like that to report floor and level. Floor and level are two different things. When you're looking at level numbers on drawings, quite often 00 will be the basement, or I always got it mixed up, but they're different. That's why there's a picture. It shows especially mezzanines. If you have mezzanine, mezzanine 1, mezzanine 2, and those sort of things. One of the biggest that has been going on is zip code. Now, that is the physical zip code of the building, not the institutional zip code. That's the building's physical zip code. One of the issues that came up with the space usage efficiency, or SU group, was, well, our main institution's here, but we have branch campuses over here that are busting at the seams that we're having to visit all that utilization over here, but we really need a building here, and there's no way for us to say that. Well, in terms of this, we'll be able to do the SU scoring by zip code and by geographic reference to an area. That gives a lot of great information in terms of needs assessments for construction projects and those kind of things. Plus, it helps us to actually map what the campus looks like as we go into a GIS environment. Some of you already are, but that's a characteristic that allows us to do that. Some of the information that was eliminated, capital investment, is gone. It's no longer on there. It seemed pretty obvious that is reported up through the financial reports in terms of the value or how much was spent on it. The building perimeter was one of those. The only thing that we'd heard that had been used for at any point was that there were, at some point, was a landscaping amount that you were allocated to have flower beds or something like that. I'm not even sure if that's accurate. However, it doesn't matter because it's no longer reported. I think, and it's kind of good because some folks, I really believe, were looking at they're using their building perimeter times the number of floors to get their gross square footage, which is an extraordinarily bad idea because not all buildings go up like this. And if you look at the manual, any of those rooms that have 2-floor penetrations, that second floor area is removed from the gross. So, really, sir. Okay, and that's kind of what we heard, that the perimeter was a part of the formula for grounds, and I think probably formula changes over time reflected that. Thank you. And the building construction type was eliminated. Is that correct? We tried to look at different ways to align that with other industry standards in terms of type construction, and then it came up to the question of why do we have it at all, and what are we using it for? And the answer was, wow, I don't know.
So the condition and all those are taken out?
No,
Or just that one?
just that one. Facilities condition element is still in there. Okay. Any questions so far? Slide, please. Okay. Again, I said you see it more than once, the timeless reporting. What we'd like to do, especially with changes, now we've heard in the last fall's reporting that, my first day at the coordinating board happened to be November 1st. So it was kind of interesting in terms of that stuff. But it is absolutely critical. So with these changes, Torsia and the folks and Doug and them are working very hard to get these reports lined up. And at TCUF, I encouraged everyone to contact them to try to send in test data, to send in the reports, is this it, will this work, before November 1st. Because again, we've still got our statutory requirement. So, and our report date's still November 1st. So as we're pushing resolving those. So let's step this out and look at trying to get those test data in and doing whatever you have to do on your institutional level to structure the data to be sent forward. Reopening reports, the same type of issue. Again, it resets the clock on us. And we want to get this stuff to you. We're going to hit that statutory deadline. That's going to occur. Sir?
When will the new format be required for updating information on the automated system?
This fall. The question was, when is the new format required for use? That is this fall. Correct, Torsia? Torsia is confirmed. So
We're not going to see that. I mean, when will it be open for practice submission, if you will?
Torsia, question, when is it going to be open for practice?
August time.
Yeah, it was. So Torsia said it would be scheduled before August, and for those test submissions of data. And if it sounds goofy that I'm repeating everything, that's because it's being broadcast. We make sure we capture it for the folks that may be watching. For the PRTs that are between now and the new submission, yes, you will be using the format that is effective at that time period. Okay, now I will tell you that that's another good thing, because the people that will be doing your reviews, I hope, are sitting right here. And a lot of it goes into, contextual understanding of what's going on at the institutions so that they can see those types of things. Yes, Larry?
The old data that does not change and is still required, will that just migrate into the new form? Can we migrate it, or must we re-enter all data in the new format?
The unchanged data, as far as that, okay, the question is the data that don't change, well, you have to structure that differently. How you work on getting those data into, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, Torsia, how you work on getting those data into that format is at the institution. Just the format that will be sent forward will be different. How you permute those data is at an institutional level. So we don't take your data and assume that we know what it is for the next year. I mean, we roll it forward just to have a filler on the thing, but it's not valid. Okay, when you report the new data, you report in the new format in those fields, and then that'll populate if you're doing a full field or full file replacement, which most institutions do a full field or a full file replacement. Okay, capacity. Oh, sir, I'm sorry. The question. Mm-hmm. Well, most institutions do a full file replacement, so those data will be in that new format. that you send each year. So when you send that, it'll populate your data that you put in that file. If you go out there and look right now, there are 2009 data sitting out there you can look at. That's rolled forward from the previous year, correct? But when you submit in the fall and all that gets updated, then that will be the data that you've submitted will become updated. No, you can't, and David brings up a good question, that you can't update piecemeal, like a little piece here, a little piece there. Now, you can do partial file replacements. However, at this juncture, I would strongly recommend don't try doing a partial file replacement with all these changes going on. In a year, okay, that may be something else. Generally, does any institution do a partial file replacement to update their annual inventory? I don't know of any, and I would recommend against doing that. There may be times when that's appropriate, but generally that does not occur. Any other questions? That's good stuff. Okay. Room capacity. This is very, very important because it branches over into the SUSE score that we're going to talk about. You know, I think it's one of those data, and I'm certainly not going to ask for a show of hands, that when you provide it each year, but if it's not really used for anything, you really don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. You know, so what ends up happening is you look and that classroom's about 40, or that one's about 50, and that one's, 100 or so. With the new SUSE scores coming up, your actual capacity of a classroom will come into play when the percent fill when in use. So if your inventory says a room has a capacity of 50, and it really has a capacity of 30, then it will definitely adversely reflect in terms of your percent filled, because you can only put 30 in there. So the best you're going to come up with is 60% filled if you fill every seat. So that it's very important to go out and check those. Now, is it possible to go out and go, oh, okay, cool, I can manipulate that. I'll just put in lower capacities on all the rooms, and bingo. Well, we've pulled the data, and we look and we know what the average square foot per classroom across the state is, or per seat. And it sits about 30. If you look at any of the industry, look across the nation, you can find 20 square feet to 40 square feet. In fact, one I saw said 100 square feet per student. I don't know what planet that is, but
Are you using NFPA standard?
well, again, we're not using these as a standard. The only thing we would use those for is maybe a red flag. If right now, let's say your data is showing at, say, 30, and then next year an institution's, not necessarily yours, but an institution's data show, oh, there's 70 square feet per seat. It might prompt us to look and go, wait a minute, is that right? And we're not saying it's not, but what it does prompt us to do is hop in our car and go look. And that's again, that we're not calling anybody anything bad, and I certainly am not saying that anybody here would do anything like that. But again, I think it's a reasonable check to go, okay, is it about right? Because it may come back and the whole mean is shifted just through greater resolution. You know, that right now we're looking at 30 across the board, and we're looking at 40. Well, is that right? And then we look, and we can look at institutions differently and go, yeah, they all kind of jumped a little bit. Probably due to increased resolution of that factor in the inventory, and that's fine. And what we're looking for is big swings, and I don't think anybody would do that. I don't think anybody would, sir.
My question concerns facilities that were built, especially Skyline Health, dental hygiene. They come out regularly, change their accreditation standards, and they limit the number of people. So, for instance, we build a facility for radiology,
Okay, now in that case, are those they have equipment in there that they would use for that? Okay, those would likely be class laboratories. So they would.
scale down my capacity because
Well, and that's understandable. The good news is, health related, they don't have to worry about utilization scores. So that's a plus. So for all the HRI folks, yay. But I would still say have your data accurate, because it is important to be accurate. And we understand the accreditation issues and those kind of things.
The same is true for nursing. If you graduate level 10-to-1 ratio, they're in a classroom that normally holds 40, but they can only have 10-to-1 ratio, so by use factor, you will always be 25% capacity, and it comes out as you're at the bottom of the list.
Well, okay, and so the question is, you have one of the program areas has some limitations, okay, and I think there's a couple ways looking at that. One, does that inform your facilities programming process in the future for development of your facilities to say perhaps we need, more appropriate sized classrooms? Two, out of the entire spectrum of offerings, that's one. And if you're down there at 25% in that one, and the vast majority are at 60 or 70%, overall that number's going to get washed.
The problem is we smaller universities don't have the luxury to have single-purpose classrooms for a single discipline. So you try to maximize your headcount. Headcount is very important for a revenue base. So the bigger the better in your freshman, sophomore courses. So by design, junior, senior years, they're going to be smaller by attrition. And so, so there's the dilemma we face that will appear as though we don't use it well, but there's a cycle in a 4 or 5 year student where it's greater use the freshman, sophomore, and junior, senior. But no consideration is given.
Well, and I understand the concern. Again, I'll try to repeat that as close as I can. Is that there's different program areas and different levels require different classes of different sizes, and I guess in looking at that, there's going to be that concern in terms of graduates. And one of the things that got brought up is that graduate students are generally, those classes are going to be smaller. Well, again, I would say that overall, in the aggregate, when you look at the percentage of graduate courses versus the undergraduate courses, there's a preponderance of undergraduate courses. That's one. Two, in those program areas where you're restricted to that, restricted to those sizes, again, the preponderance overall is going to be with the non-restricted or less restricted. But I guess overall, the whole idea behind this is, and we're kind of talking about soon, we're getting ahead, but that's okay, is that it informs the facilities programming process and development process to get the right size rooms. If there's an issue where across the board there's smaller classrooms are required and a project comes forward that says we're going to put smaller classrooms in here, we're going to reprogram other space, well, that would seem to be very logical. So again, it's designed to inform the facilities programming process.
As I understand, Sue, there is no ranking.
Right. It doesn't matter. I mean, we can rank them.
At some point, someone's going to make an informed management decision about the pattern that's established and why it's there.
That would be correct. And the question statement was there's no ranking, although they can be ranked and all those, like anything else can be ranked. But by changing it from an interval variable to a nominal variable or ordinal, and then really a nominal in the end, you either did or you didn't reach a score, you can rank it, sure, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's either you met the standard or you did not. And we will get to that. I don't want to go any further on the Sioux stuff. Let's stick inventory. So Larry, we won't lose you, man. We won't lose you. Okay. One of the other parts, the annual project update. Each year we've sent out this Excel file to say what's the status of your projects. You've got all these approved, not online, how much of it's online, how much of it's not. What we'd like to do this fall, and what we can do this fall, is make that essentially a companion report to the 11 and 14. That if it's online, then so much goes online, essentially to be able to reconcile the facilities books as of November. And it gives us progression. One of the things the board has wanted was a progression along the project timeline from programming, design, or design programming on through. Okay, that allows us to do that. What stage are we at in the process, and how does that match up to the inventory? And it permits remediation with minimal impact on model timelines. Okay, if we find that an institution project is partially complete, it's 2 buildings, one of them is complete and it's occupied, we can then progress those, because otherwise it's very easy for a mistake to occur where the approved not online is still out there at, say, 100,000 square feet, although 50,000 is occupied. 50,000 has been put on the inventory, but 100,000 is still shown on the approved not online, and it hurts you in terms of your deficit. So that's one of the things that we will be working towards. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. Slide. Okay. Now, we're a little bit ahead, so we're going to continue on to the 50-minute point. Excuse me. Okay. Now, I told you that we would, and we shall. Okay. Space use efficiency. Working group got together, I don't know, James, about a year or so on this, looking at a bunch of different factors, and it really went the gamut. I mean, geez, it was years ago. Started talking about we got to do something with the utilization. It was one number that really showed how much one type, or really two types of rooms were used for an entire year, and that it really wasn't used. It was used for had such little utility that it wasn't. It was just a guideline. Well, there was an impetus, a push to make it a standard that buildings need to be used to a certain extent. As a follow-up to that, and it had very high level and still does to this day, one of the bills, HB 746, which has passed, is partially in response to this, is that there are these rooms that aren't being used. They just sit empty, and we're building more classrooms, but there's classrooms that aren't being used. And anybody who's been around the institution very long has heard the statement, I walked by and there wasn't a classroom being used at all. Nobody was in the classrooms. And, well, what time? Well, Friday at 4. Sounds reasonable to me. I hope not. I mean, but, no, I don't hope not. I hope they're used all the time, 24 hours a day. And it says current, what historically was 38 hours per week classroom, 25 hours class lab. That was based on study paper 14. Sir. Yes, in terms of 746, in its current state, it has gone to the governor. The original bill stated that any institution of higher education could go to another institution of higher education, and I'm paraphrasing, and I may get some of the small details off, but generally I'll get the gist. And go to that institution and require them to provide a classroom that's not being used for the purpose of teaching core classes. And the original bill said any IHE to any IHE. Well, institutes of higher education, based on statute 61.003, means anything. HRIs, community colleges, senior institutions, extension services. There are many system centers, system offices. So anything, anywhere where there's a classroom that wasn't being used between, the original said 6 and 10, I believe. It's since changed. On weekdays, and 8 till 5 on weekends, and the institution could not decline a request, nor could they charge for the use of that facility. That was the original bill. It has gone through committee and everything else, and it's actually at the governor now, where an institution of higher education may make available those classrooms, and they may charge a rate that we will determine. Based on, and really we haven't figured out exactly what we're going to base it on. We'll wait till the governor actually signs it, and then, but we'll come up with the actual recovery rate. But it states in there right now that they can charge the amount that they would get in infrastructure funding if they had taught that course themselves. So, another change that's in the version that is at the governor's office right now is that it will be, let's see if I can catch a phrase, that the recovery, let me see, you got the, yeah, you have to, if you make it, thank you, well, it states there junior college. If it says if an institution makes available to another junior college, they must keep, it must remain available the entire week, or the entire semester, I'm sorry, the entire semester. Question there in terms of if an institution of higher education makes it available to another junior college, well, that word another junior college can, and I'll leave it to folks downtown to figure out what exactly that means. Whether that means, does that mean it has to be another junior college? Or that the host has to be a junior college? I think there'll need to be a decision on that, on that exact phrase. But that's pretty much it right now. It's gone to the governor. Our position on it was that in its original state, no cost recovery, no real choice, essentially an institution walk in and go, Herm, give me keys. Might be a little aggressive, and there was another portion, 746, that had to do with service areas. That's all been stricken. But we thought that was a little bit much. That was our analysis that we sent forward. It's available online. You can see it. Sir? The reporting requirements that were attached to that, we wrote a fairly robust note, and all the reporting requirements have been removed. It was substantial. We estimated the impact would have been where right now we do utilization studies or space usage studies on 42 institutions once a year. We would have to do 160 institutions 4 times a year. In detailed time of day analysis, which means all those institutions would hence have to report the data, and many of those don't report anything right now. So for the institutions that do report 05 data, it would be very easy. Not very easy. They'd have to redo the 05 report. But there are some that didn't do any of it. They would have to build it from scratch. All the reporting requirements had been pulled from the version that's before the governor right now. Yeah, well, the inventory, all the reports. The bigger ones, again, were the usage, because even some of the data that the bill called for, we don't currently process it to report it. We would now have to process it and report it and those kind of things. It will, however, stimulate. I've talked to Doug about this briefly in terms of how do we capture rooms that are used. In fact, it was part of the discussion that Larry and I were having earlier. How do we capture the rooms that Institution A is using at Institution B? We don't prorate classrooms, so we can't really prorate it out to partial, external use, and they pull that one on their inventory. How do we capture that? We're kicking around some different ideas right now to, before we say anything forward, to have actually a proposal to say, here's what we're looking at, tell us why it won't work, why it's great, but is to, in some way, put a FICE code, and then you could report the building number, adding a field for a host FICE code. So essentially, you're reporting it on your 5 with such and such a FICE code in that room at that time, and then we can reconcile it based on that, and it can cross those boundaries. Again, very much in the preliminary stages, and it won't hit this fall. But that's what we're looking at, because it did stimulate that thought, well, how are we going to, somebody's going to do that. How are we going to report it? How are we going to know? How are institutions going to get appropriate credit for that additional demand on their facilities? How? And then, so we'll figure it out some way, and we'll probably get together a group of you smart folks and say, hey, why won't this work? Or is it a good idea? And then go forward from there. We count on that. Because you guys see it every day. It's like the old thing. If you got a bunch of gears and you spin this, you turn this one a little bit, but you don't see the other one over here that goes at about 3,000 RPM when you just turn it one. We want to make sure when we do that, we see all the gears and what the effects are, and that's why we count on you folks. Okay, and you can look at the new measure now. Really, in the end, one of the big concerns on the new SUE measure is how am I going to get the institution to understand it? How am I going to get them to understand it? Well, really, it's the end product. We want, staffs at all levels are there for one of the main reasons is to reduce executive overload of information. This takes it down to a very nominal point. Either you're at 75 points or above, or you're not. The purpose of this measure is to determine whether a project goes on a consent calendar. That's how we use it, the staff. Whether it goes on a consent calendar at a board meeting or strategic planning committee meeting, or it does not, or whether an institution has to present. That's how far we use it. Now, will the board sit down and perhaps ask some pointed questions about that? I would imagine that will occur. And again, that's at their discretion to do those sorts of things anyways. And those kind of questions were asked previously. Well, how full are your classrooms? And the answer was, I don't know, pretty full, or they're all jammed up, or they're not full at all. But there's all these other things. So it kind of lends a little bit of confusion. The entire part of this is that it tells you, here's on the aggregate, your classrooms and class labs, when in use, there are X percent of on the aggregate percent of the seats filled in that room. Is that the end all be all? No, there's other measures. And I got to touch on one thing. As I got here, and I was actually on both sides of this one. I was an institutional rep, and I came in as a coordinating board rep. And as I got there and started looking through all the old files, it's kind of interesting, and I'd never seen them before. All these things had been discussed as far back as 2001. The demand measure was specifically laid out. Essentially what that does takes all your classes that you report on your 5, that goes on classroom type areas that aren't required to be in a lab of some sort, and compares them to your number of classrooms. That's an aggregate global campus planning mechanism. If we didn't have a campus, we're going to start today, we're going to have 10,000 classes, how many classrooms do we need? That's the aggregate level. So what's the number of classrooms? Then the utilization measures, how much we're using the ones we got. And then the percent fill is, okay, how full are they? So it really captures in one number in the end what kind of the whole picture is. Plus, it gives you, in the event that you're below the line, so to speak, or not in compliance and you're required to present, it gives you the exact areas to address when you're discussing with the strategic planning committee or the coordinating board, your points when you go forward and say, look, this project will improve this. And here's the thing, we're great on our utilization, our demand is super, but our percent fill is low. And here's some of the issue. We have these programs that have restricted enrollment levels. And we currently don't have the facilities roster to address to fit that. So we have to put them in these rooms. However, this project will retrofit 22 classrooms to X amount of size to meet those needs. Or if you decide to not even put them in a classroom, put them in a conference room, you get credit for that based on the demand measure, so you're not losing it. Previously, if you took those 10 people and didn't put them in a classroom, properly fitted it into, say, a 10-person conference room or meeting room, you would completely lose that class for utilization credit. Now you don't. As long as it's reported on the 5, you get the demand measure credit for it. So, plus on the other hand, on the other side, there was a disincentive to right size the use of your facilities. So if you had, these classrooms, I got to put stuff in the classroom, got to put it in the classrooms, I don't care how big it is, got to put it in the classrooms. And it might result in you having to turn on an air handler zone that would heat and or cool. We're in Texas, normally it's the cool side of it. Sometimes it's heat. This huge area, now you can make some good informed decisions on putting them in a certain air handler zone or zoning out your air handlers such that in these reduced demand times you can compartmentalize that, saving utility dollars. Before, there was a distance. If I had 2 people need a classroom, there's a direct disincentive to put them to not put them in this room and to heat and cool this entire room. Which just didn't, I think I speak for the general gist of the discussion with me, that didn't make much sense to provide a disincentive like that to properly steward the use of facilities. This captures that. So maybe a room isn't in a classroom. Or maybe a class isn't in a classroom. That's understandable. Or in case of a graduate course, maybe there's a lab section that doesn't need to be in a 210. It needs to be in a 250 for a doctoral section. Okay, again, that would be lost. But now, it can be pulled in and it's captured in the demand measure. So again, there is credit given it. You're not getting it anyways now, so it increases in the area that you get structure in. Okay. Any questions thus far? So, in terms of the you know, the executive use of these data, one of the things that James brought up at I think the last meeting was, is anybody finding use for these data at their institution? And the resounding answer was yes, people find these kind of data useful. Many institutions, if we didn't require it, they don't track it. They only track what we require them to track, or they only structure. Well, now, if they weren't before, perhaps a scheduling office thought it was a great idea to do this, but they couldn't get the resources and assets to do it. Now they can. And institutions find utility. Ma'am. Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, that's one of the things we're kind of getting into space model reviews is none of the models really handle the blended environment because there's so many flavors to distance learning. There's this strict almost correspondence type course down to the ultra blended, and it's really a huge continuum. And in fact, I'm sitting on some of the different councils from the state to try to get a good picture on how do we compartmentalize and call it this kind of activity or that kind of activity. Because it is. I mean, there are so many different areas. In terms of that, if that course is reported, regardless of when and where, the utilization will still kill the stack. That stays the same. But in terms of demand, it will show on the demand. The stack won't kill. It won't kill the demand. So you'll get the credit on the demand measure. So it'll pick it up that way. If it's reported on the 5, we don't remove for stacking, correct? We do not remove for stacking for that reason. So you will get credit in the demand measure, but not in the utilization. So, and again, that it seems perhaps everybody wants to get the full everything, but again, there's some limitations. Again, one of the other things that came out of the committee was they wanted a triennial initial review and then quintennial after that. So in 3 years, once we get good data, we'll reconvene the group again, and we'll sit down and go, okay, what worked, what didn't work. Again, and we needed that extra time instead of 1 year because this will have a secondary effect on the institution. Institutional scheduling behavior, reporting behavior, those kind of things will change. It'll take at least a year for that to occur, and then take another year to see the impact of both of those mixing together. Then we can get a better look at what was the real impact. I mean, if we look at it 1 year, we'd be missing. And again, for the fact that there isn't any funding tied to this, that's so we didn't think that was necessarily with the limited use that it has currently. Now it can go on forward, and I tell you folks, I think every state in the union is struggling with this exact thing. Every state, how do you do this? And I think really, to the credit of that working group, this is really the vanguard of the nation. I got a call from the University of Wisconsin, and Northern Michigan University, who had called Wisconsin. They said call Texas because they're doing stuff in this exact area, and that's all you guys' work. Because every state is struggling with this. How do you capture this easily? If you look at some of the stuffs out there with WSCH, factor variable 4, and you think this is really pretty easy. I mean, you can follow it over. Okay, this times that times that. Okay, and in the end, you've got a number. 75? Yep. Woohoo! Not 79. Damn, what do we need to fix? Or, well, I guess we'll have to present. I mean, there's stuff that, Stephen Hawking would kind of go, huh? It's that challenging. So again, you guys are on the vanguard, and I applaud you for it. And like anything else, there's that change and there's that transitional time. But again, the big question, one of the issues was, well, I don't think people understand it. In that book, and the only reason that says draft on it in some cases, or it should in most, is because it is, well, I guess we printed the non-draft, so. Oh, they did finish it. Well, I was on vacation up until yesterday, and so it's clear. Okay, so that's official now. We only had draft on it because it had to go through our external relations to look and say, no, you had a period in the wrong place. But that's it. But again, we put 2 examples in there in the back. Say, okay, here's an institution, here's what their actual scores were, and here was the result. Okay, the good old Mountain View University. Okay, and we've already found that there's a greater number of institutions that meet this standard. The standard is applied to determine, on our case, in a nominal basis, whether a project goes on a consent calendar or on the actual presentation calendar. Now, the board members can look at it in greater detail, and that's certainly their prerogative. But again, it structures the argument in the developmental plan or the action plan to say, yes, our percent fill is the one factor that we're lower on, and getting our percent fill, and that project doesn't necessarily have to result in the meeting the standard, but what it has to do is say that at the end of this project we will have improved in the following ways. But more so, it gives real good information, I think, on the institutional level to have those discussions. To really look and say, look, our average percent fill is 50%. We're only filling up 50% of our seats. Or we are jammed when we're at 85% occupancy, but we're not using them. Our hours per week is a little bit low. So, I mean, those are really simple cases. Well, okay, we, have enough classrooms and we're jamming them up real tight. We're putting a lot of students in there. Okay, so maybe we don't need more classrooms. Maybe we need other types of stuff. Okay, slide, please. Okay, and that goes through what we just talked about. Slide. Okay, to the other things. Essentially, based on the band of your scores that you're in, you're assigned a certain number of points. Those points are multiplied by the data are automatically grouped into an array, and then those data, a weighting factor is applied to them. Now, the weighting factor right now is set, and we discussed it we discussed it in the working group, we discussed it with the Strategic Planning Committee and the Coordinating Board. Also, those weighting factors allow over time for the strategic focus to be adjusted. To say, look, we think we as a matter of policy, the Coordinating Board members, not staff, believe that we should fill up our classrooms to the maximum extent. We need to reward and endorse that kind of scheduling behavior. Therefore, we're going to weight that factor at a greater level. The rules simply say 75. We're going to use these 3 factors, and it points towards 75. So that allows the board to go in and make those assessments. Again, we would not recommend any until after the 3-year point, and we would want to do that informed by the input of the institutions and what their thoughts are. And same thing in terms of banding. The banding, where you see those point bands, those are based on different studies that have been done. The one we cite in there is the SCEVS study out of Virginia that looked at some totals. We look back to study paper 14 and study paper 18 that were done many, many years ago here at the Coordinating Board. They fall about in that line with what had been said there. So again, the numbers have a lot of consensual validity and generalizability. So I think they're very valid.
The first scores, will they be coming out at the end of the fall semester?
Can you repeat that real quick, Eli?
The scoring will come out at the end of the fall semester, pretty much.
The question is, will the scoring be coming out at the end of the fall semester? You have the first one. It's using last year's data. And that was the decision of the Strategic Planning Committee that they wanted to do that, and by all means we're going to do that. And again, we've seen projects that that have gone to the presentation phase before the board, and we've actually seen it discussed about projects. I'll pick on A&M, one of their projects, but they're doing very well in this area. So that was just a point of discussion at the last Coordinating Board meeting to go through there. Again, the bottom line, in terms of that executive overload and what the presidents and the CFOs want to know, am I at this point or am I not? And if not, why? And it tells you right there. Well, if you're not at that point, you just follow it right over. And it gives you the actual fuel to get to that point. Because how many people here think that folks really understood or even understand now how utilization the old way was calculated? Very few. I didn't see like people jumping up on the table. Very few really. There were, if you look across the state, there were very few that understood the idiosyncrasies about stacking of classes and about certain types of course numbers are excluded and certain room types and, durations and when two overlap kind of like this, which one, and very few have followed it down at that level. Again, that's still there. This just breaks it down into a number. We're either above this line or below that line. It actually simplifies it for the actual consumption at the terminal data user. Okay, any other questions? Sir? Yes. Okay, the question is, we mentioned that scoring would be broken down by zip code. What we'll do is we'll take those buildings, restrict the population of those classes and buildings to a given zip code, because in the 5, there's a building number and a room number given. So we can attribute those classes to that building number and that room number, essentially treating that zip code or those building numbers like it's its own campus, like it's its own university, essentially restricting all the other data out of that are considering them not under study, and then isolating that based on that zip code descriptor. I certainly hope that's not. The question was, will we have a complete report for every zip code? On this coming report, no. Is there in time will we develop one where you can click on a zip code and it runs the report to actually pop it out for that? Perhaps. It won't be this fall, I can assure you. But what we can do is when a project comes forward, if it is under study or if it's under question, or one of those cases where an institution says, yeah, but we can run those data fairly easily. It would be on an ad hoc basis. Well, based on what... Well, we built this. The formulae are in there. If I was at the institution, I would replicate it. That was one of the big things I wanted to be able to do, is make it replicatable. And I would replicate those data and produce it myself and put it in the application and say, okay, yes, our overall is here. However, in this zip code, our utilization is such and such. Then on our side, when Jennifer, or we'll have a new person here in the beginning of July who will also be doing it, or Paul or whomever is working it, looks and goes, okay, let me run that. And it'll just be a point of verification. That's if I was there doing it, I would put a number to it rather than... Right. Right, and even when we get it, I mean, we won't run every possible zip code permutation unless you guys all want to like pass the hat. We can get like a huge staff and a building. No, but over time, what we'll do is we'll build some reports over time and try to make those as automated as possible to where we can go in and grab those, pop in a certain zip code, it pulls out the predefined parameters and spits out a report based on that zip code and FICE or whatever the characteristics are. We've got to look at that because a lot of times doing different things like that causes a secondary issue with other data, because these data are used across the agency, across the state, up, down, sideways, and again, turning this gear to make sure we're not spinning something else off the bearings over here. We want to make sure that before we turn it, we're doing that. So again, at least between now and then, it gives you good fuel for your case if you say, okay, well, let's take these data as they're right here, it's right off R5, and let's put them together. Let's see what our numbers are. Let's exclude them by zip code, physical zip code of the building, and run from there. I would recommend doing that for any project. That way you know the answer to the question before you ask it. Any other questions? Okay, let's take a little bit longer break, 15 minutes. Okay, please. Sure. Okay.
We're going the other way because College of Education and Business, they have went out on grants and bought special computers for their work. And we want to make sure that they have first dibs priority. When we open up our classroom, anybody can get into the classroom with that. So there's no way to restrict that. Well, you could manipulate the system, but we want to give the colleges that are in essence using that the majority of the time. So we had to put it into a 210 category so that you could have right of first refusal on 210s, but not 110s. We want to make classrooms universal, except for those, but they bring in extra equipment.
Well, and I think you hit on a very good point, Larry, in terms of a classroom being universal or generalizable or whatever. And that's why I said, 20 years ago, that computer, maybe even longer ago, that computer would have really made it special, something special about it. Now, computers are pretty much universal. If we don't provide them, then they bring them. I mean, I look right here, and we see people have their laptops out, and of course, and if I was in there, I would have mine out. But again, it's less universal. One of the things we were thinking of, and I'd like to pose this to you, is that, and it's in talk through the process, is if computers are in a room and those computers, there's something about them that restricts their use from other disciplines, then that would by nature be specialized equipment to that field, then 210. That would be verifiable through the scheduling. So if you have them, say, in the College of Education, and all the sections in there are scheduled as education, 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 then perhaps that would be considered a 210. However, if you have a room that has computers in it, and it's College of Education, College of Architecture, English, and you have several different types scheduled in there, that would be then generalizable based on the actual behavior of the use of the room. So the preponderance of use, which is a term in the inventory, of course, we all know that you hear a lot. The preponderance of use would be generalizable across many areas. Hence, that would be a 110 based on the pattern of behavior in use of the room. If it's restricted to a certain field, then it would be 210 based on the scheduling behavior and the use of that room with those computers in it. Now, and truly, and those of you that know me, you know when I mean this, I mean shoot that down, blow holes in it, and I mean that with all sincerity, and I've got really thick skin.
That is, you're asking us to patterns of use for actual content. In many cases, what limits the computer to discipline software running on it. How are we going to know that other than you're saying, look at what's actually scheduled in there? That's enormous.
Okay, Jimmy?
I don't know how anybody else's schedule is. The scheduling data that you get, but our scheduling data has a code for lecture or lab. And I look at the room use, and if I see a preponderance of lab usage, that tells me something. Or lecture, that tells me something. 2 rooms the same. We're using one as a lab most of the time. Specialized software or whatever else. It's obvious because that's what I'm scheduling into the room.
Okay. Please.
We have have software on there, CAD drafting, point software, and software. The classroom is used 40 of the time as lab. Office size computers, specific software on there, so that they could be more improved. Those are scheduled currently as 2 teams. Use in there is labs for those different disciplines.
Okay. Any other feedback on that? So if I understand it, kind of to summarize, we have some folks say, yeah, it's great. Others that say, the actual preponderance of the type section that is scheduled in that room. And then let that drive, which would be in accordance with it now. David, you...
It just strikes me that it's always been the case that the preponderance of use of the room is what kind of room.
Okay.
Always
Agreed, and that's in the manual, black letter.
Regardless of what factor you're considering, whether it's more lecture in lab or more lab in lecture, or there are less than 20 hours a week of classroom activity in the classroom, regardless of the factor you consider, it's the preponderance of the use of the room that's going to dictate what you call it. That seems fairly straightforward. I mean, I may be wrong, but
Well, and I think we, as a policy, we owe it to the institutions to give a definition in the manual or in an update or addendum to the manual of that specific question, because I know the audits that institutions that I audited went into rooms, computers in it, and they said this is a lab, and there were X number of there was classes all over, but no one really used it as a lab per se. It is specialized equipment. Looking at the actual nominal definition in the manual says contains specialized equipment or equipment specific to a certain discipline for regularly scheduled, not of course paraphrasing, but it's pretty close. And so really a defining factor in terms of that lab versus other room type is that equipment seems to be one of those defining points. So, and I guess the question, I guess a bigger question would be, is the lab, is the presence of the computer more like a chair, or is it more like some special equipment? And then you look at the preponderance of the use of the room. Because many times you have labs that there's really no special equipment in there. I mean, depending on the discipline, there very well may not be anything special in there. Sean? Sure. So, and to summarize, it's just difficult because, that there's been a drop in the number of classrooms, an increase in the number of labs. Agreed. I saw the same thing when I was at Tech. I've seen the same thing here across the state. And I guess the thing is that I want to get your feedback is when we define preponderance, when we define this, because it's going to impact SUE scoring substantially. I mean, we've got one we're looking at, the presence of that computer does not in itself create the conditions for it to be a lab. You walk in, it's got computers, lab, and walk off. Is there a consensus that would not be correct? You look at a room, there's computers in there, therefore it's a lab. Would you agree that that's a correct statement? Okay, so the presence of the computers then does indicate that it's a lab. Okay, so, maybe I threw a double negative in there. Let me try this one again. I probably did. I accept responsibility. Do we have a consensus to what David said? All right. Applaud David back there. He said what I was thinking, and that's awesome, because I can seldom do that. But no, exactly. So that lab, that computer, does not necessarily mean it's a lab. Now, then what's the... And I got to laugh because, that was probably the next thing I got to say. So when we do define it, the way that the room's used, based on whether lab sections are scheduled in there or lecture sections are scheduled in there, then defines it. Would that be a statement that we have consensus would be correct? Okay, so if we were to draft something up as an addendum under like the frequently asked questions or special things, that if you have a room that contains computers, you must then ask the computers themselves, do not define the room, that you have to look at the preponderance of use, whether they're lecture sections or lab sections. And sure, go ahead, that's why we're here.
Study, because a lot of these labs that we're teaching, we used closed for certain hours, courses, and then at the other times, open these labs and go ahead and use them for study, work on lab projects, so forth and so on. But this is individual study, it's not linked, it's not formal, it's on, so, I mean, that's, I find that's what happens with many of our computer labs. That would normally be, you know, might want to pass it as a computer lab. But when I start asking them, well, what do you, I look at your scheduling here, and I see you're scheduling that for 10 hours a week, and what's going on in there the rest of the time? Well, students are in there working on their stuff. Okay, well, that tells me a lot about how I should classify it.
I find that true, particularly in music and architecture. Those kids come and go as they please. All of my architecture labs, the kids are in there literally from sun up to sun down, but you get 3-hour credit for a room that's being used 12 hours a day.
But I mean, there's that, and the type of lab that is changing.
That's 220.
Yeah.
Right, and exactly, and that's, I think that's one case, and whether it's 210, 220, 230, but then there's another one that's going to be more, is whether, classroom versus class lab, because I think, from our perspective, the coordinating board, you can have a classroom with computers in it. I think we can agree that that is very reasonable, and in many cases expected. And then you can also have a class lab that has computers in it, so that the actual computer itself is not a defining characteristic. However, the defining characteristic is the type of activities that are scheduled in there, the preponderance. In the case you're talking about with the additional activity independent studies, if the preponderance is individual study, you guys answered it right there, it then becomes a different type of lab, not a class laboratory. Okay.
Another thing that would affect the predominant use would be, like someone mentioned the software, but in some cases you could have a different computer that's designed for a different purpose. So it's always good to just, again, go to the computer itself does not define it, but then you take a second look and that will probably be the definition.
Okay, so because in that case where you have something about that computer makes it special, then that should be reflected in the actual scheduling of the room that there are other things. That there's generally a certain field is scheduled in there and those type of sections. The problem then arises that if indeed that happens, what if those are lecture sections that have to do with that? See, because if we use just whether it's lab section or lecture section, for that specific field very well may put their lecture section in that room with those.
Well, I'm talking the equivalent versus software. You can have any kind of software in a computer, but sometimes you might have a computer design the way that you interface with it, or it might be designed. I don't really know if you can do that now, but
Sure.
it could be.
But I understand you could have a room where the lecture and the lab for a given discipline is held in the same type of room. Or you could have labs that are scheduled in classrooms. You could have lectures that are scheduled in labs.
But again, you have to take that second look.
Yeah, so again, that I don't want to throw in mud to it, but again with the audit, which I think, or with the peer review, which I think is great. I think there's a lot of great information sharing. I mean, it's one of those things that's specifically looked at is it a classroom? And there it's a yes, no. Either it is or it isn't. And so what we'll do is we'll draft up, and I'm sure we'll have all of your names and all that. We're going to draft up something along those lines. Yeah, Greg.
One other thing, we have a couple of rooms that have special equipment. Their lectures are taught across different areas, but they're just as education courses,
Sure.
thousands of dollars of equipment in there. Those things are locked up tight. Not everybody can use specific areas can use those classrooms. It's not open for the general use. But their lectures occur in there. So by the use their lectures, their minds available specialized equipment, but there's lectures that
Dollar you've got that defined already, but the actual outing use is going to be low.
back happen, it's a regular class.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a case where I think every institution has those rooms where, for whatever reason, they're guarded, and they hire their own militia and stuff to make sure nobody else schedules in them, and you got those, and I think that's one of those things that's an institutional, and I certainly don't want to broach into that subject from the coordinating board, and I'm more certain that you don't want me to, but what we want to do is be able to put out a global kind of a policy statement to help inform the process, so if a PRT comes in, they can look at a common definition or a common policy to then say, okay, I can look at this, I see what you're saying, and I've got a predefined set of parameters by which to make the decision of whether something is in compliance or is not in compliance. Sir? Well, we try not to penalize anybody for anything, but how would it affect? I mean, you would, however. I think the question in terms of whether or not there's an adverse impact on a room if you're teaching both in one, when the utilization numbers are run and everything else, then it's going to be based on the room and the room type, and that's how those numbers will then shoot up from there. Will it have? Oh, thanks, Steve. We actually have microphones, and I'd completely spaced it. So, for all those folks watching, my apologies. But we definitely have all this recorded, so we're in good shape. Does it? I don't know. You can look at any one room or any small instance, and it, it does or it doesn't. But then when you look at the global, is it really going to have an impact? I don't know that you can answer that without looking at the totality of the circumstance. I guess in my kind of view of it is you report the data as accurately as you possibly can, and then it plays out the way it plays out. If that's the place where it's scheduled, and that's the decision, the corporate decision to schedule those classes there, then you lay the numbers out, and here's what it comes out as. If the question then becomes how can we enhance one or the other by moving this activity there, will have this effect. I think that's where, again, the good side of having the SUE and all those data at your fingertips helps, is because you can look and say, yeah, while that will help this factor, when we take those 10 people that fit real nicely in that 10-person lab and we drop them over here in that 20-person classroom, well, we might go up in that area a little bit, but we go down this one a whole lot. So, again, and that's just the measure at the end. Again, you have to make the decisions. You code the rooms as accurately as you possibly can, and your scheduling. And again, that's where the whole question in this case came up is, what define accurate? I mean, what, because, we look at the nominal definition, it says specialized equipment, blah, blah, blah. What does that really mean? I think it needs that next statement of really a policy. Does the computer define special? Is there something special about it? I think the preponderance of what I've heard is that no, the computer itself does not define. It's not defined as special equipment. However, there may be cases where it is, and what really defines it is the actual use of the room and the type of activities that are going on there. That's the point where evidentiary point, when a PRT comes through and says, okay, why is this room a lab? That's when you hand them there. There's our scheduling data. Here's all the sections that are in it. Okay. I think that's, but we owe that just clarity across the board, because someone else may look and go, yes, but there's no special equipment in here. Or there's computers in here. How can you call it a classroom? So we owe that second to you. Okay. Cool. Anything else on that subject? Or otherwise? Cool. Now that we've got the mics out that I completely spaced. Okay, that's a Texas. That's pretty cool too. Are we in the wrong one? Okay, cool. Okay, any other, I'm sure there are any other questions or discussion on the SUE score. Again, our position, we're running it, we've published the numbers. Now, obviously, the institutions will do some different things, and that will take about a year for that to happen. And then we'll have to look at that, and then another year, and that's when we'll come on the triennial review. Again, from the staff's perspective, our use of these data are to determine whether something is or is not in compliance, and it's based on building type. If you're putting up a lab building, your classroom SUE score is not considered. Just the lab SUE score will be considered. And vice versa, if you're putting up a classroom building, then your lab score will just be your classroom score. So again, it's focuses that.
Did you go over that slide that
Huh? I thought we talked about, can you back up one, please? Back one slide. This one? Yeah, we went over it very quickly. It's in there. Essentially, utilization rate, that's the way it always has been. Nothing changed. No change to that. The demand, and that's what I talked to you, that's your total hours of, and you see classroom type activity, that's in your 5, you'll have room types associated with all the entries in your CBM 005. If it's a 200 series room entry, that's some sort of lab, then it will go into the lab demand score. All others will go into the classroom demand score. Right, 680, all those 110s. Yes, everything except your 200 series. And again, that measure, the idea behind the demand measure is that that's a global metric. Say this is how many activities you have, how many rooms you need to have to do that many activities. The number's a little bit higher in the demand because, again, we understand you're not just going to put stuff in classrooms and class labs per se. It's going to be in different places, as it should be. There's just some cases where some of the graduate courses where have 2 or 3 people in it. It is just not a good idea from a resource management standpoint to fill up a lecture hall with those few people. Okay. And then your percent fill, that's the average percent fill of your classrooms or class labs of use when in use. We don't consider times it's not used. So if you've got an entry on your CBM 005 of a classroom that has a capacity of 100 and that room has 85 people in it, that one gets 85%. You go down there. And on the aggregate over all of your offerings that are scheduled in classrooms, then you'll get an average percent fill of your classrooms. Same with class lab. And that's a very widely used metric across the state. I think one of the things across the nation, one of the things that gives us a heads up, kind of a head start on the other parts of the nation is we already have these reports. The coolest thing about this, I think, I know when I was sitting in the institution, is I didn't have to send anything else. What I was sending right now is all I'm sending. There's no transactional cost. There's no administrative burden to sending it. You just send the same stuff. Now, when you start getting into the data and what do all they mean, now there may be some significant things, but I think those are all good side effects. Plus, these numbers have a lot of utility on the campus itself. And from my perspective, the greatest thing is in the construction programming process, what do we really need in terms of classrooms and class labs? Okay. Good, all right. You can click ahead too. Any further questions on this? James, sir.
May want to make a comment about the status of SUE. It's now a rule.
Yes, thank you very much. It is a rule. It's in the rules online and published. What's published in there is the actual types of construction when you submit a project and which one of the scores will come into play for that, and the 75 points or above within the standard. That is in the rules and it's effective as of now. It went through the text register, went through several iterations with the strategic planning committee and the coordinating board, text register, and that is a rule that's in effect right now as you go forward. So, thank you very much. Anything else? And again, if you're not in that line, the only thing here's what it requires you to do. If a project is below, if you're submitting a project and it's below the threshold, below the 75 points, and it matches an action plan, which is very similar to your space surplus action plan. In fact, it's the same form, there's a different name on it. A very quick statement of how you're going to go forward and improving in these areas, in the areas that you need to improve, because you may have a demand measure that's off the scale, and you may have a percent fill that's not. Well, it kind of focuses, how is this going to go? How are you going to go forward? And I wouldn't even presume to tell you different ways to do that, but again, it helps focus that to go forward. And again, it kind of prepositions the questions that are going to arise. The questions that will come forward will be about the percent fill of your classrooms, how many you need overall, or how you're using the ones you have now. And those are, you can already get prepared for your presentation in terms of those questions themselves. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, I'm sure there will be tons as we go forward, and I know that you won't hesitate to call or contact me. And I look forward to it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, and he's going to talk a little bit about construction costs and replacement value, something near and dear to everyone's heart.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me with this thing. I don't think we're going to switch out the lapel mic. So we have two things here. There's been a change to the construction cost, but there hasn't been any changes to the replacement value calculations. We wanted to put it on the agenda because we wanted to give you an opportunity to ask us any questions about it. I know it's been a little less than clear in the past, and we've done some work in the last year to try and maybe clear that up a little bit. So we thought we'd open that up to comment. Go ahead, slide. Thank you, Jennifer. The construction cost had some significant changes, and if you submit project applications for approval, they will affect the thresholds that you see. It's important to keep in mind, though, that this really has a determination on whether or not your project is on the consent calendar or you have to do a presentation to the board to get the approval completed. The very first thing that we attempted to do when we convened the work group in last fall is we tried to increase the scope of the projects that could be included in the calculation. Some concerns arose about the numbers not being up to speed with inflation. We were bumping against the max quite a bit. So the work group discussed a few different options, and including 7 years worth of projects instead of 5 was one way to correct that issue. Another thing is to calculate for regional differences. Previously, we were not adjusting, say, for example, a project in El Paso was the same dollar as a project in Houston. The replacement value calculation has historically used the RS means location adjustment factor, and so we adopted that coefficient into the calculation for construction cost. So what we do is, if you had a project, say, in 2002 in El Paso, we would take and inflate the dollars up to Houston, to current, and then we use the location adjustment factor to adjust for El Paso and make it like you'd built it in Houston. Does that make sense? It's a little simple, I think, but might be confusing for some. Another thing we wanted to do was incorporate construction timeline into the evaluation. We do this on the tail end. We'll calculate all the square footages, we'll publish our report on the web like we've done historically, and then we've created a calculator so that we can take your start and finish project timeline that you put into the application, we calculate the midpoint, and then we use a inflation forecast. We basically are using the T-bill, T-note yield curve to push those forward so that the cost per square foot that you're putting on your applications, it isn't what it was last October, it's what it should be at the midpoint of your construction. Now that has got to drive some questions. No? We've got an Excel spreadsheet that we can send you. It's what we're going to use. to go out to the web at the various sites that are available to pull the information in. So as you complete your MP1s, per se, like somebody was asking about earlier, or you're filling out your application, you should be able to replicate pretty closely what we're going to use for your cost per square foot on the application. The last thing we have to contend with is the fact that we've changed the threshold. Historically, it's been the maximum value by facility or building type, and now we're going to use the average plus one standard deviation of all the construction projects in that facility type. In most cases, that's really close to the max. In some cases, it's a little bit below, but it seems to be a more equitable maximum threshold than just using the maximum value ever in a particular facility type. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Sure.
I'll repeat it. When we actually do the Board of Regents certification, and it asks if we meet the standard of cost, how are we going to know what that cost is at midpoint that you're comparing to?
It's a pretty good question. I'm not sure that we've thought about that. Have we considered how they're going to know what we're going to use for their BOR, for their Board of Regents application? On the fly, if I were to say what we're going to do, we're probably going to ask you to complete our calculator, because when you do your BOR, it's not the same time frame always as when we do our application, but you complete that worksheet. You go out to the websites that have the data in it, you plug it in, you print it out, and you attach that with the BOR, so that when you've completed that, if you meet the standard at that time, at least we'll have documentation, something radically changed. These things don't swing a lot. Say you complete that thing in April and we do yours in October, I would be surprised if it changed enough to make a difference. But we basically included all these complexing factors because people last year specifically were very concerned about the rampant inflation that we were experiencing in the construction market. We're now actually going in the opposite direction and experiencing a little bit of deflation. But that's probably what we're going to recommend to you. Thanks, that was a good question.
Just to make sure there's still an understanding that there will still be one that's published, on the ranges, or not the range, but the max will still be published. So y'all can use that one and like he's saying, it won't differ greatly, we don't think.
This isn't quite the right slide. I had something different in mind. Can you go page up? There we go. That's it. So, like I said before, we're going to average over 7 years versus the 5. Replace cost estimates with actuals. This is kind of going to be a twist, too. In the past, we've taken the cost estimates you've given us in ICPS for construction cost, and we've used those to calculate the average construction cost per square foot. Starting last fall, we definitely got good data on your completed projects. And as we continue to collect that data in, we're going to substitute out the estimates in that 7-year period for the construction costs with the actual construction costs that you report to us in the tracking report. So every November or December, when we collect that tracking report information from you, we will basically just swap out the actual construction costs for those estimated costs. And we're just doing that to get a more realistic cost for this square footage. If nothing else, it's more timely. Sometimes your projects might take 2 or 3 years to complete. You estimate inflation's gone crazy. The number's quite a bit larger when you're done. Lastly, we're going to attempt to add other projects built in Texas. So I don't think we've actually nailed down how we're going to execute that piece of policy, but we intend to include not only your projects, but maybe some of the projects from the private institutions or other similar types of construction projects in the state.
Let me jump in there. Normally, our turnaround on projects when you submit a project application is very quick. 3-4 days if it's a local level, if it doesn't have to go to the strategic planning committee or the coordinating board. In the event that one of these projects, one of these types that we just, across the state, not many have been built, I don't know, whatever type, there may be a slight delay in getting that process while we're out researching those data. And we appreciate your patience on this, and we will communicate that to you all when you submit a project. Say, hey, it's going to be a little bit longer. We've got to go out and contact some central appraisal districts and things like that to get these types of, one that pops in mind is performing arts centers. That they're just, what's that? Imaging centers, yes, the imaging center. We might even have to look nationally. And then we've got to take those data and correct them for the regional differences and all those kind of things. So if there may be a slight delay in those while we get those data. And but again, that would be out of the norm. Normally we turn those things around in a couple days with all the approval and everything. So if there is a delay, we'll try to contact you and make sure that you're aware of why there's a delay.
Along with the handouts, I included a calculation sheet that we typically do when we have one of these. So this is how we're actually sitting down and calculating it. I did not include that second half because we're not quite done with the calculator yet. But when I do send out the Excel spreadsheet, you'll be able to glean the same information that you see on this single-page handout. Okay. The next piece of it is the replacement cost, and I kind of ran head-on into the replacement cost last fall. I was asked, how is this calculated? And we had a couple of different sheets out there for how to calculate replacement value, but they didn't necessarily bring you back to the same numbers that we were seeing. Yes, Eli?
Before you head out, on these costs that you're talking about, I'm assuming you're talking about building costs. What about like parking lots or infrastructure? Do you time it to building, or you look at it separately, or?
Historically, there's been a section on here for a per parking space cost, and I assume that's what your question's referring to. We managed to get away from it. So there is a building type for parking. Say if you build an entire parking structure, a cost per square foot for that. But really, honestly, unless you guys desperately want to report to the board how much each parking space is going to cost and met to standard, it's not really serving a lot of value. It goes into the entire construction cost of a particular facility. So I think it's answered to in the end aggregate number. Yeah, it goes with the building. Okay. If anybody sees any complications with that, we'd appreciate the input. We may not have all the data that we'd like to for that particular piece of it because we don't get that many parking type projects. So replacement value. The reason we wanted to include this is we did a little bit of work last fall, and we're going to continue to do some more work and hold a work group to look at the E&G replacement value calculation. We've gotten a lot of comments on it. When we sent out the report this fall, we included an Excel spreadsheet, basically a calculator. If you put your inventory into the last two spreadsheets of that, you could see exactly how the E&G replacement value was being calculated on the inputs you gave us. And it was speculated that perhaps somebody might want to ask some questions on that, but if there are none, I think that's fine too. Anyone? Okay. That's it then. How often is the E&G replacement value reported? We report that every fall. Same cycle, no changes.
Okay, the next thing we'll talk about, take a couple minutes and we'll take a break, is some of the things we see up there on the horizon and things that we're looking forward to doing. But I want to say first, the group up here, and I think as many, my predecessors have, we do listen, and we do need your feedback. We want it, and we want to know what the issues are out there in the field. We don't know what they are. We don't know, and a lot of times it's not going to make a difference to us, because there might be an issue that's a localized phenomenon. There might be an issue at West Texas A&M that has nothing to do, it's just up there or whatever, but we don't know that until we bring that out, and we want to be able to get those feedback. And one of the things that we want to, and kind of a case in point is last fall, we had both a telephone and face-to-face conference with several of the facilities officers from institutions. I know Tech was on the phone, A&M was on the phone, Gary and his crew there. They said, look, we want to do something about the construction cost threshold for reporting and approval. At the time, it was $1 million for new construction and $2 million for renovations. And you had to then go through the entire process, go through the Board of Regents and certification, very long process. And they came forward and said, we want to up that. We looked at a few different scenarios, and right now the bill has been signed by the governor that it is now $4 million, and it's effective on 1 September, correct? 1 September, $4 million for new construction, $4 million for renovations. And I use that as a case in point because, that didn't come out of us. We didn't dream it up. That came out of institutions come forward and say, hey, there's an issue. We'd like you to take a look at it. We did, and it seemed very reasonable. What that will reduce is substantially the amount of projects that have to come forward. For us, again, we have pretty quick turnaround time. You get it to us within a $4 million project, or at that time, say a $1.5 million new construction project, we turn that around there's cases where we've turned them around in a matter of minutes. Especially like an institution calls and says, we're closing on this property acquisition in 1 hour. And we forgot to send you the request here. It's right here. Can you fit? Well, we got all the paperwork. Yeah, and we did it, and they closed. And now, thankfully, that was a rarity. We've had others where, hey, we've got to get it done right now, or it's late, and we're very accommodating, and nothing's going to change with that. But again, that wasn't the part that was such the concern. The big thing was meeting the Board of Regents, because regents meet every 90 days. And the coordinating board meets every 90 days, so you could extend this timeline out very far for what's a relatively minor project, and it hadn't been updated in a long time. Again, that came out of the institutions. The proposal that came out of that meeting was $3 million for new construction, $6 million for renovations. Actually, up the new construction to 4, drop the renovations to 4, so it's universal. And we also built in the ability that the coordinating board, by rule, in the future, can modify those numbers. So we don't have to go through, wait for the legislature and all that kind of thing. If the coordinating board believes those numbers need to be adjusted, we can adjust those internally now. Please.
But the MP1 is still going to stay at $1 million?
The MP1, and that is going to stay at $1 million. They serve two different purposes, and that really gives us the opportunity to kind of get an idea of what all this going on across the state. Now, one of the other questions in terms of the $4 million threshold is, what about the project we have that we've already had approved at, say, $1.5 million for new construction, and the project cost has gone up to, say, $3 million? It's doubled. We don't want it. Our rule that we've proposed right now is that, and it's going forward as an emergency rule to the next meeting, is that until it meets the $4 million threshold, it does not require reapproval. Now, if it goes to the point where it meets that threshold and it meets the other conditions, then of course you have to resubmit the project for reapproval. The reality of the capital development world is it does shift. I mean, if you look at some of the ENR forecasts that Paul's talking about, there's some forecasts that show that the prices will actually drop. It's going to be cheaper. So, and I say that because as you're looking at these numbers and as they inflate, they may not inflate. They may recess or deflate. They may actually be lower. It's just dated us. There's nothing good or bad. So we recommend that everyone do the math before you send it. And that's, Paul had hit on one of the things, and I want to reiterate, is the transparency and replicatability. Transparency is like the huge word nowadays, so I try not to use it too much. But it's the replicatability, the ability for you to, without a whole lot of effort, to go in, do the exact process that we use, and get the number ahead of time. Because many of the things, in terms of replacement cost, that was impossible. It was just simply, you couldn't do it. Now, you can. Again, that was demand from the institution. We do take that stuff seriously in terms of that. So probably first and foremost, the space model. We are going to be starting the process. We estimate it's going to take quite some time to relook at the space model top to bottom. And some of the and there will be a call going out for members of the institutions to serve on those advisory groups and working groups. And there will probably be several subgroups for different factors on the space model. It's a huge endeavor. This has been around a long time. This is what your infrastructure support funding is based on. It's not based on how many square feet you actually have or anything. It's based on your modeled square footage. And we need to renew it to keep pace with the changing face of higher education. Several of the articles that are out now and talking about higher education, that the emerging learner, it's a more fluid environment. Less students are, leave high school, go to college, stay in college 4 years, get out, get a job, work 30 years, get the gold watch, have 20 kids, leave, go on, retire, buy a boat. Less people are doing it. They're in, they're out, they come in, they get certification, they take some classes, they get some training, and over time, so there's more lifelong learners, which shifts the demand on everything from the faculty to the facilities. And as we talked about earlier, the virtual environment. What impact does that have on the space model? Well, you talk to one group and they say, yes, the virtual influence on higher education result in a greater need for facilities. And then you talk to another group that says the impact on the virtual has less need for facilities. It's cost effective because we don't make students there. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And that's what we want to get at. There's a lot of data out there, and that's part of, I think DECA is the name of it, that I'm going to be sitting in with and listening to figure out, what are the different flavors of it, because there are a bunch. Research. Is there a standard amount? Is the 9,000, is that right? Is that enough? Is it too much? Is using the research expenditures the best way? I don't know, and that's what we want to get folks that are looking at it. So, and actually walking out of there with a product. So as those working groups go forward, it'll be a lot like that the inventory group was. I mean, it sat down and rolled sleeves up and got after it. And when they walked out of there, said, "Yep, that's it. That's what we're setting forward," and that's what we want to replicate because there's such great success in doing that. But we're going to count on all of you. But there's many parts of that space model. It's the amount of square feet per full-time student. Is it appropriate? Is it too much? Is it too little? Again, those are things we want to look at. Okay, and we definitely want to look for opportunities to simplify it, if that's possible. It may not be. If you simplify it too much, you may lose some of the resolution on the data, and there will be many runs of these data. Because, again, you turn this wheel and this one over here comes off the bearings. You turn this over here and, wow, these institutions do great, but somebody over here loses $5 million a year in funding. That's not what we're looking for. If all of them are going to come out less, then okay, then it reduce all, so we can see a relative shift in the population insofar as the variables themselves permit the shift. In terms of replacement cost, transparency and the impacts. We just saw some secondary impacts of the current replacement costs that were undesirable. And it happened at a very unfortunate time. But again, you generally look at things when it's time to look at them, and when something's really important, there's usually an effect. That effect came, it went, it happened. The only thing we can do now is fix it for the next iteration. Of course, the SUA program 3-year review. We're looking at that. In terms of reporting, one of the things we're looking at is a weekly update, and this had been done in the past, to the reporting officials and chief executives as reports are due. And Doug Park and I have been talking about it, that there will be a weekly report that here's today's date, here's all the reports that are going to be due next week, and here's all the reports that have been due. Once all the institutions have closed it out, that week will drop off the calendar. So it'll be out there. There'll be a date. If you're on one side of the line, you're delinquent, I guess would be the term. And if you're on this line, it gives you a heads up that this is what's coming in the future. Okay? Because again, I know things get busy and things drop off. Another one we're looking at is a project closeout for capital projects. Very common. I know when I did stuff with the GSA, that was very common. When you close out and punch list a project, you had a closing report. Part of that was your expenditures and how many square feet, injuries on the job. We don't want all that stuff. But all those different things in that report. A very condensed version of that because, as Paul was talking, we want to use real costs, real construction costs. Now, unless you're an incredible estimator, that numbers that you send out for the approval are not going to be what they come out at the end. And we just want to capture those data so we can accurately go forward with the construction cost data in the future. But then also knowing, as I was saying earlier, when did the project come online? It's very possible for it to go one of two directions. You say, yep, project's done and online, and it's 5,000 square feet are occupied currently, but it's a 90,000 square foot project. So we stop looking at it, and a lot of times those things can drop. They can drop very easily. Or vice versa, you report the 50,000 on. You're still in construction on the other 50, but you say, no, it's not complete. So now it ends up cutting your deficit by 50,000 square feet. So this way, we actually have a reconciliation of the books. This is it with, this is it without, and we can look for other things. Okay? We're trying to make that very minimum and to run in concert with other reports that would normally be done through the course and try to leverage those to the greatest extent. More importantly, those are some things that we're looking at. More importantly, I want to hear what those things from you, what do we need to look at? And let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll hit that. Hey, if I could have your attention real quick, I've been approached that some folks want to go ahead and hit lunch now and pick it up at 1. Is that what we want to do? I see some people going, I see arms on hand rests, and usually that's a signal. Well, we're going to have some discussion. I'd like to get some open forum and hear some issues from you folks, and that's... Up at 1. Is that what we want to do? I see some people going, I see arms on hand rests, and usually that's a signal. So, yes, no? Well, we're going to have some discussion. I'd like to get some open forum and hear some issues from you folks. Go to, show of hands. Here, Democratic Society. Go to lunch now. Raise your hand. I see some people going, I see keep going now. Hand rests, and usually that's a... Ooh, that was close. I might have to count. Yes, no? Okay, one more. Yeah, see, you got 2 hands. We got to have a recount. No hanging chads. All right, to go to lunch now, raise your hand. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, and stay and press on for another half hour. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You don't count. 10, 11, 12. Okay, everybody have a seat. Let's get going. Democracy in action. That's great. Yeah. Wait, no. I changed my mind. I have to go back. Yes.
We're looking back at the course time.
Did it make that better? Okay. Again, and this is an open forum. We want to hear what the kind of things, what the issues are that are out there from you all. What kind of things do we need to start focusing in your opinion, we need to start focusing our efforts on? Of course, we've got a lot of inputs. You're probably, to us, one of the most critical. Because, I mean, that's the where the rubber meets the road. So we'd open it up right now for anything we need to look at. Sir. Go. Sorry.
good thing you're right here. You asked about replacement cost. I get requests all the time for the replacement cost, and I tell them that it's the coordinating board replacement cost because I don't calculate it anymore. And this replacement cost is calculated through the formula, and it's not to be used for replacement value of the building. And they say, well, what can we do? And they tear their hair and they go out and try all kinds of things. Is it possible for the coordinating board for all the institutions to provide a realistic replacement cost based on some standard-like means so that institutions can do renovations and replacement? As you know, here in Houston, we have to either replace the building because of a structural problem or we have damage because of a hurricane. So that's basically my question. Is it possible for the coordinating board to come up with a realistic replacement cost?
Well, and that's one of the exact things we're going to look at. Right now, it's complicated. I mean, I couldn't even begin to start to explain it, other than to say it's really complicated. There are industry standards. In fact, we were talking about that in one of the sidebars, is that there are, almost every institution, I think everyone has a risk management office who deals with these type of things, who look at these real numbers. And there are some industry standards, whether it's means or others that are out there, to determine what would it cost to rebuild a given building. That's all those different things we want to look at to come up with a number that has greater utility and that's really more mutually understood and accepted. So I think your point is well made, and that's one of the actual issues that we're going to discuss. Thank you. Others? Sir.
This deals with the space utilization with the several different factors going in now, and also virtual education. We have several classes that meet one time a year. They're web-based classes. How does that impact the space utilization? As example, one class that's 30 students. They meet once a year. Can you kind of describe how that helps us or hurts us in the demand?
Okay, and excellent question. I thank you for touching on a point we had discussed in there. Your institution turns in a OOC report, which is like continuing education report, and those are your more ad hoc. It has no defined start and stop except on that report. Somewhere between like September 1 and December 1, it occurs in there. We, in discussions with Doug in the educational data, we can use that report, and we haven't integrated it yet. We're looking at integrating those numbers. We got busy with the legislature, sorry. But taking those now, we can use them in their state for the demand measure, because we can determine the date, and we can determine the duration and how much relative time that would occupy. Okay, but we can't use it for the utilization because the data contained in the report are insufficient to make that calculation, and the percent fill, the data are insufficient right now in the current report. But we can pull it over and use it in the demand measure. We aren't right now, but it's something that we're going to look at. It's something that came out of the working groups that we need to look at, and we absolutely agree that institutions should get credit for those kind of continuing ed, where it may start September 1st and go to October 1st. And they should get a relative credit because it's what they do. It's their institutional mission. Does that answer the question? Okay. But it is something we're looking at. Again, we've identified that the data are sufficient to pull them in for the demand measure, but as far as utilization, there are insufficient data in the C right now to be able to calculate that, or the percent fill, there are insufficient data. Okay, other issues, please. Shoot now, or just send us "you're great." And we know that's not true. We're getting there, though. Sir.
We've got, on the technical side, we've got a lot of machining, mechanical engineering classes at our institution. And one of the buildings that we has an extremely large, originally was a Air Force warehouse that has a very extremely large footprint, open footprint, that we have 3 different disciplines that use this area
different sections of the area for their labs. One is industrial systems, the other one's maybe a hydraulics class, the other one may be a machining or lathe class. Last year when we were having these meetings, you'd brought up something from Tech about the possibility of having phantom walls. And after looking at our current utilization of that space, I think that may be something that we can do, but I was wanting to know if you could kind of give us a little bit more information on how you could go about having phantom walls to break up those large sections or areas. We've got a big, large building that's probably 100 by 100 that's a diesel technology that also has that same issue.
Okay, and in the question in terms of phantom walls, this is something that came out of the NCEES manual. It was discussed, and with the consensus of the group was, yeah, sure, phantom walls are appropriate. I think like anything else, you can take them to extremes. But essentially for those of you that aren't familiar with it, phantom walls, if you use this room as an example, and we have a large open area, and just for reference point, let's say from here over is used by the office of the registrar. Okay, we can go in and using the CAD systems, essentially put in a phantom wall, or you could use just pen and ink, I suppose, but put in a phantom wall here and here, defining this area as, say, if this is room 200, that may be 200A. And then this area from here over is used by the chancellor's office, and that would be 200B, and it allows you to do that. Now, that can be taken to extremes, where you start phantom walling off offices and all this kind of stuff. But for what you describe, like a large hangar, which is, many, 10, 30, 50,000 square feet, that using a phantom wall, as long as when the time comes for the PRT, you can identify on the drawing from this point to this point, it's clearly delineated. And again, it's just something that if you were walking and looking at from the outside going, no, okay, it makes sense. And again, in the aggregate, all the data is going to come out the same. The only thing you're going to miss is you're not going to have the width of the wall times the width of the structural wall times the length that would be not excluded where it would normally be excluded from your signable now, which would be a minor amount of space, unless you have like 4-foot thick walls all over the building. So I don't think there are those. But that could be a potential solution. Again, as long as you can stand there and explain, here it is right here to there, then it's fine.
We've got it marked on the floor most of the time. It's just, that's one large, huge area, and when we're looking at utilization, I think the phantom walls would benefit us. And we also have the hangar issue where we have, probably a quarter or half of that hangar we use for the lab. The rest of it's more storage, but there's no walls there. So currently we're using the whole thing, and our utilization is not real good in that hangar.
Yeah, and I think it can go wrong, very difficult to validate. Let's say this was all a big cube farm, and you made all these hallways that are in between where the cubes are and all this stuff. Well, cubicles can be moved, and then you got to update all your drawing. That can get, and if you're willing to do that, I suppose that's reasonable, that you have to have certain passageway or access ways in and out. Or you start doing each little individual cubicle is a room, well, and then you come in and reconfigure cubicles, well, you just rebuilt the building as But again, as long as whatever is done, someone can sit down and validate what it is, then that shouldn't be an issue. I don't see it as an issue. Ma'am.
Going the other direction, you have classrooms. I'm going the other direction. You have classrooms. You have one, say, large classroom that you have accordion walls that you subdivide off, and you have, say, 3 to 4 individual classrooms. The majority of the time, those are always used as a smaller classroom. But then you have, say, once or twice a semester, you open up all the accordion areas and you utilize the entire space. Now, when we were just doing the regular utilization, we could accommodate that because we could then list the individual classrooms A, B, C, D. But now that we're doing percent fill, how are we going to calculate that on the entire area versus breaking it down individually for the classrooms?
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question?
No, that's an excellent question. I think there are several ways to go about it. And I don't know, I'm just, again, working in it, I've written it down as an issue we'll take a look at. I think just, if you had different sections, just gave them section numbers, they all may meet at the same time, or each one has a different area. I mean, that would be overly rambunctious. Yeah. You might get a huge, you schedule both rooms for that one section. You can have multiple classes in multiple locations, or you can have the same class in multiple locations. I mean, that is, you can report it that way. That's an interesting question. We will look at that one. Well, why don't you just schedule it differently? There, okay, settled, good. Woo! No, of course, we will look at it. We will look at it, of course we will. Okay, any other question? That's very good. Yeah, Angel.
So then, kind of tying on to both of these last discussions, how different then is the use of phantom walls versus prorating use?
Excellent question. I mean, prorating use, you're talking about you're using off the base actual use. When you phantom wall, you're looking at a different complete function. Or, there's something that delineates that. Say, this is, you put a conference table over here. This probably isn't the best example. This is our conference room area, and that's our office area. But if you're going into a classroom and say, yeah, we're going to phantom wall the middle, and we're going to call this something else. Well, I suppose you could do that. But your capacity is going to shift down. And then what's that other use for? And again, if you could come in and say, oh, yeah, we changed the capacity, and so we phantom walled off this part of the classroom, so the capacity is 10, but we routinely have 50 people in here, and I don't think that would stand, that first check. I'm not saying you're saying this, but as far as the term is like, what? That doesn't pass that initial smell test. I think anytime you deal with classrooms, classrooms are classrooms. I mean, that's almost always and clearly defined. And then I would ask then this, okay, if this is a classroom and there was a class in progress in this little area, what can you possibly do over here? And there's really, I think most of the faculty members I've had experience with might have issue with other activities going on in the same room. Sir.
Data file to the new format. Is that still?
If you could.
Sure. At the TCUF meeting in January, it was mentioned that you would make an attempt to convert to the new format for us, just so we could look at it. Is that still in the works, or?
I'd have to defer to Torsia. I know Doug was down there, and he had mentioned some of that stuff about converting the existing data in the new file structure. Do you know?
I mean, Lewis is working on the program as of now, and I'm sure that he'll probably incorporate what he can. Of course, he's not going to be able to put in the zip codes or the floor of the rooms, but I'm sure that once it's done, once we can actually test it, and then he'll work on that at the second phase of actually uploading your file as it should be.
Thank you. It's just we're in the middle of a banner conversion, and so programming resources are very limited. So.
Well, I think one of the key things is what we're changing is actually the output format and the format going forward. So the back end, all that, I mean, that's one thing, and then it's a matter of getting that report produced in a certain format is another. So we certainly hope that, and I mean, this was a couple of years ago, people said, well, if you change that, then I've changed my entire program. And then it brought up, said, well, you mean your whole program is designed solely to produce this one report? And, well, I know Banner isn't, but, okay, well, and then Banner's a good thing. So, again, and then there are ways, and I'm certainly not going to get, it's not outside of my area of expertise to that, but I know that we're talking about the export report, the output, not necessarily the back-end programming. Okay. I mean, I'm sure they will change what they have. Of course, the zip codes, they don't have it. Floor, they don't have it, so they can't do it. Okay. Any other questions? Any other issues? So life is good. should be in the reporting manual. I think it's updated. In fact, this part is actually integrated into the new reporting procedures manual. Is that correct, Torsia? That's what y'all did? Right. Yeah, it's actually, so all those are integrated together now. So the actual format and how many characters and all that appear in that manual. Okay. If not, they're online with the new reporting procedures manual. So, and again, will it be without hiccups? Probably not, but that's why you guys are here, to let us know when those hiccups occur. And we count on it. Okay. Anything else?
I have one comment. On the reporting manual that we printed out for your convenience, that is actually a subset of the entire reporting manual. I'm sure most of you probably already know that, but I was asked to just make it clear that there are other reports that go in the manual. We just kept it brief and only printed out these few pages.
Okay. I just want to recap the kind of things that were brought up. Of course, the replacement cost was brought up, and we're going to revisit that. The issue involving the SU scoring and the OOC and those continuing education kind of courses and integrating those, absolutely. The use of phantom walls and maybe looking at some clearer guidance on the use of phantom walls. I think that's something that we can go forward with, and then just getting and closing out the file conversion in terms of to the new format. Like anything else, there's going to be some hiccups, and we address them as quick as we get them, and we count on your feedback. But some of the things you can look at fairly quickly that will be really up front are of course the 4 million threshold for those of you that deal with that. That's a pretty big issue. Now, they did not modify to our knowledge, the bond review board's thresholds, although we submitted that as that needed to update also. So in terms of those reporting requirements, they stand. The bond review board is not part of our agency, so it doesn't affect it. But you can consult with your folks on that. The SU score is up and running. The new inventory file formats is moving on. We'll be looking at the space model. That's, if you're looking for a result of that anytime soon, please don't. It's going to be a while, and it's going to take a lot of groups, subgroups, and we're going to try to get it as close as we can, because it's not one of those things you want to revisit every year or every 2 years. But I have to tell you, having been on the institutional side, one of the things that makes these things that have happened recently, whether it's the audit, the SU, the inventory changes that went on, the construction costs, any of those, it was really a matter of the institutions getting together and rolling their sleeves up and saying, here it is. This is what we believe it should be. And giving us something to take forward. And then, of course, having the board members and other provide their position on things. But again, it starts the process, it frames the process, and allows us to go forward. You've got a great group of folks up here that are great advocates, and we'll do everything we can to support you. Of course, we have a lot of folks that we have to support, and sometimes those things come into conflict with one another, and we try to keep in communication with you all. We will. It's noon. We will be here afternoon. Any of the folks that are relatively new to any of this kind of stuff, we'll be here to answer whatever questions you have at noon. I know there are several. There may not be any in this group, or even if you're not and you have questions, we will be here at noon or at 1 o'clock to answer any of those. Okay. Some of you have been doing this a long time. We're part of the working groups as they went forward, so they're like, yeah, no, I got it. But others have that dangling question, may not want to ask in the group, would rather ask one-on-one. We will be here at 1 o'clock. But, yes, James.
For more years than we'd ever want to talk about. This has not always been the way that we've interacted with the coordinating board. And so to you and to the staff, to Susan and everyone else, thank you. we realize there's still going to be some questions, there are going to be some things we're going to have to hash over, and things that are going to be things that are maybe not the way we want them. But we really know, at least I think most of us realize and appreciate how much y'all are listening. So thank you very much for that, and for this opportunity today. So thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome, and you know, it's a pleasure having been on both sides. This is a great group up here. I can't say enough for them. I mean, they're, you know, when you have a capital project of $15 million can be turned around, approved, all levels approved back in a matter of, in some cases, hours. That's astounding. And the levels they go to, you know, are they're, you know, no matter what, I mean, they do it. And so a lot of times when they call back, or Jennifer sends an email back with some, you know, request for some relatively odd, like, what? You know, there's a reason. We're just trying to, let's just get it done and get your project, get it before the people that approve it. We don't. People standing right here do not approve it. We just, we gather the data, we inform the process, and we feed the decision-making process. Another thing that will be going on in the fall are the formula advisory committees. I don't know if anybody in this room will be on those. That's a huge deal. I mean, and they will be going on also. So it's going to be a busy fall. And busy winter, and then it'll be spring, and it'll still be busy, and then the legislature will get ready to go back, it'll be busy again. And then, so anyways, with that, I do appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing you all on different working groups. We'll be sending out calls for those things to your institutions to be part of that, and we look forward to it. Thank you very much, folks.